Hello and welcome. My guest today is Andrij Dobriansky, Director of Communication at the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. Andrij, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you, and thank you for having me back on.
So, the talks are over, the war goes on, but a large-scale prisoner exchange is expected. Is this the outcome Trump was hoping for?
Oh, no, Trump just wants to pretend that he has an influential voice here, but as we all know, we're approaching 3 months since Ukraine agreed to a full and complete ceasefire. That is the first point on all of its peace proposals, both to the Trump administration and to the Russian side, and we have yet to see any serious ceasefire proposal from the Russian side. So I think Trump can keep on doing his rhetoric this week. We also know that he is expected to be in front of his fellow G7 members and NATO alliance members this month. I think they will be confronting him, not so much in the public, but in the private meetings during those meetings.
Do you expect the US to impose a new sanction, maybe some like sanction Lindsey Graham?
Yeah, I don't expect those to be voted on before the G7 and the NATO summit. I believe that during those summits is a good opportunity for the teams to talk about what kind of sanctions they want. At the moment, part of the sanctions that are being proposed by Lindsey Graham include several actions against European firms. I believe that's probably playing up to President Trump's dislike for the EU and wanting to tariff them. So we'll see what the actual legislation will be at the end, but I don't anticipate them to be voted on before President Trump actually has meaningful conversations with both the G7 leaders and the NATO summit.
Do you see these talks as a positive step or as a trap set by Russia?
Regardless of whether it's a trap or not, it is incumbent on Ukraine. Ukraine will always fly to meet with President Trump. Ukraine will always sit at the table if asked. And that is the imbalance here. Russia clearly doesn't feel that it's incumbent on them to participate in anything. So Ukraine has demonstrated to America and the Western alliance that they are always willing to sit down and talk. It is not Ukraine that's a warmonger. Ukraine is simply responding in kind to all the deaths that have been inflicted upon the civilian population of Ukraine.
Now to the US and the silence from one man. Donald Trump is unusually quiet after the Ukrainian strike. He hasn't posted any angry comments or blamed Ukraine for derailing peace efforts. Why do you think that is? Is this a thing of a shift in his position or just a calculated pause?
I think the big thing is he's going to be questioning his own staff and understanding why the United States isn't knowing about these attacks before they happen. And that's operational security for Ukraine. It also underscores if President Trump receives a full briefing on how Ukraine did this, this means that President Zelensky knew about the ability for Ukraine to do this while he met in the Oval Office, while President Trump was telling President Zelensky he didn't have the cards. President Zelensky knew that he had an operation that could be launched at any moment, and they decided to launch it and demonstrates just how many cards Ukraine has.
The President Zelensky says Russia loses will force Putin to negotiate, but isn't it more likely that Trump will be the one to push Russia to the table? Yesterday's drone strike on Russia airfield was extraordinary. Some even compare it to Pearl Harbor in terms of impact. Do you think this attack will really influence the path to negotiations?
Well, I've been really pushing back on my interviews about when Americans bring up Pearl Harbor, because I will remind Americans that Pearl Harbor was when America was not involved in war. It was not attacking anybody. And in this case, Ukraine has been the victim of attack and is simply responding in kind. As to how President Trump can push President Putin, I think that he needs to get on board with what the coalition of the willing is doing. So it's more sanctions, it's more military support, it's more of these victories for Ukraine on the battlefield, as well as I would bring up the international tribunal that's going ahead in the EU. But we just had another report by the Independent Commission at the United Nations that was released last week that the drones that were hunting civilians in Kherson amount to crimes against the humanity. We just saw a great drone attack that specifically targeted Russian military assets, not civilians. And here we have, in the same week, the United Nations documenting that crimes against humanity because Russia deploys its drones not on military targets, but to hunt out civilians.
How did you feel when you first saw the reports about Ukrainians' special operation?
I thought it was going to be a sad day for Ukraine because we know that how many Shaheds and drones were launched against Ukraine, as well as some ballistic missiles against Ukraine. And that was what I woke up to in the morning. I woke up to those accounts before the Shahed explosions were discovered by the United States or announced on social media. Then my day changed a little when American News reached out to me to schedule some interviews for the rest of the week. Later on in the day, we had a terror attack in the United States against several people, and that changed the American news producers as well. So my schedule has been all over the place this week, trying to figure out when my next interview is, just because of all the international news. And I didn't even mention the fact that there's an election in Poland that happened, and that's also something that's getting lost in the American news market. So for me, I woke up thinking it would be a sad day, incredibly proud of Ukraine's armed forces and all the people that put this response together. And as an American, very glad that so many tactical nuclear bombers were taken out of commission. This is something that Ronald Reagan would have dreamed of, the fact that they were eliminated, that we no longer have to worry about these kind of nuclear weapon launching airplanes being in commission.
Just the day before the talks, Ukraine destroyed a huge number of Russian aircraft. Some are calling it a moment that rewrites a military history. Many expected Russia to walk away from negotiations after that. Why do you think they showed up anyway?
At that point, they were already en route. We know that they're not going to seriously bring up any conversations about a ceasefire or a peace plan. But just like last time in Istanbul, as we heard from all the members of the Ukrainian delegation, if we get one Ukrainian a POW released, that's worth it to sit down with the Russians. So I'm glad that they at least brought that up. We also know that Ukraine brought up the issue and put down the names of hundreds of children that they would like returned right away. Also, another very important thing to sit down with the Russians about, no matter what the situation is. As far as waking up and seeing what's happening, I'm glad that the Russians saw that and understood how weak they are. But you are right that this is a moment for military history. A lot of military war colleges in the United States have been studying the war from 2014-2015 in Ukraine because that was done with a lot of technology from the past, tank warfare specifically, different maneuvers on the battlefield, moving troops around. This time, from the war that began in 2022, a lot of Western military academies are looking at the innovation that's happening. So it's not just the innovation with older equipment that happened before. Now we're using all new sorts of equipment. And the number one response that is being mentioned across the world is that many militaries will now have to invest in covering their airplanes and not leaving them exposed on airports.
And turning to the US economy and growing risk, JP Morgan warns that America's bond market could face serious trouble if Washington doesn't act on the national debt. What exactly is going on?
What has been said for decades in the United States is kicking the can down the road. So not addressing the problem right now. That is happening with the Republican spending bill that was passed by the House. It does not address the deficit that we are spending more than we are bringing in. In fact, it cuts taxes for rich people even more. It does do some cuts for programs here in the United States such as Medicaid for those who aren't able to pay for their own health care. But that's not a savings in the long run because it simply adds to the debt. And that is why numerous Republicans, numerous conservatives, traditional conservatives are against this spending plan for the United States, and why the bond market actually responded last week when the House passed that legislation. They responded very negatively. Now, we do have a separate issue from the budget where there is a debt limit that the Congress has to vote on. President Trump has demanded that a repeal of the debt limit be included in future legislation. But right now, neither side, neither the Democrats nor Republicans are signing up for that because they always use that as a potential tool in their budget negotiations going forward. So we've already had the debt rating, the final debt rating of all the ones that were lowered for the United States. Moody's lowered its debt rating just in the past month. And I believe that it'll only get worse unless lawmakers in the United States begin to seriously address the issue that we have a bigger deficit that we have taken into account.
And building on what you just said, it seems like U.S. politicians are unable to solve the debt problem right now. The whole process looks like chaos.
Well, it's chaos, but it's also traditional politics where they have a plan of where they want to go. Their main concern was extending tax cuts from the Trump administration in 2017. Those tax cuts are mostly for those at the top percent. So the richest people in America get the vast benefit. And that was their main priority in their tax bill is to extend those tax cuts because they were set to expire this year, 10 years after they were passed. And that would have been a major hit across the entire U.S. economy. To get to that point, to get to people being agreement in that, they've had to trade a lot of other things. And a lot of parts of the spending bill includes increase in defense spending. We saw what happened with the announcement for the Golden Dome for the United States. We know President Trump wants more border walls constructed. All of these things cost money. All of these things had to be traded in return for getting the final goal because they only passed this bill with 2 or 3 votes to spare.
And finally, China and the U.S. Is a trade war over. There are reports of a possible phone call this week between Trump and Xi Jinping. What's the current state of U.S.-China relations, and what should we expect from that conversation? Could this be a reset or just more tension?
Well, the reset happened in a month ago when a conversation happened in Switzerland with a Chinese delegation as well as our U.S. finance minister. Given the fact that since that time, Scott Bessent, our Secretary of the Economy, just this weekend announced that the China talks are going nowhere. There's been no progress in the last week. I believe that the phone call is a potential way between Xi Jinping and President Trump to restart those negotiations because according to Scott Bessent, this entire weekend and even last week, he was explaining to people that the talks that they thought they had progress in Switzerland have slowed down, and perhaps bringing in President Trump and President Xi to the table are the way out of this. We know that President Trump wanted a big negotiation during his first term as president. That big negotiation, that big deal never happened. He had to settle for a small deal once COVID broke out. But we'll see if he's able to do it this time. All economic indicators show that China is not willing to bend to President Trump's demands, though.
So are the problems between the U.S. and China just beginning? Are investors right to be this worried?
Yes, I mean, one thing that helped out was the fact that the meeting in Switzerland temporarily lowered the tariffs back down to something more reasonable. So all the deliveries that were stopped from Liberation Day on April 2nd, when Trump announced an unbelievable high tariff, all the tariffs from there were lowered against China to a reasonable amount. So as I understand it, businesses were able to keep importing items from China, restart importing things from China. They might decide to import as much as possible now until the tariff jumps up again. But it's really this uncertainty of when Trump will bring back tariffs or when China will raise tariffs that we don't know how it's going to settle out the economy. And in the end, America should worry about its economy first and foremost, not about scoring points about who has higher tariffs.
Could this conversation between Trump and Xi Jinping be aimed at pressuring Putin?
From my understanding, all of these conversations with different countries that the United States has had regarding the tariffs, once Liberation Day happened, all of them have included a military portion or a security portion into it. So absolutely, the China-Russian connection, given how many Russian parts are ending up in the rockets and the drones that Russia is manufacturing, we need to stop that cooperation in some way. I frankly think that we also see at the United Nations that China, for the most part, has not strongly condemned, also not strongly been in support of Russia, especially on the issue of annexing foreign territories. It's very clear that China will never support the annexation of occupied territories. But for Ukraine and the United States, I think it's more important to see if they can come to an agreement to pressure Putin to stop, to start a ceasefire, to stop firing on Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Andrij. Really appreciate your time and insights. Great having you with us.
Thank you so much.
Hello and welcome. My guest today is Uriel Epshtein, Executive Director of the Renew Democracy Initiative. Uriel, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
The US ambassador to Turkey said that Trump has run out of patience when it comes to ending the war in Ukraine. This isn't the first thing that Trump is generally angry with Putin over his manipulations. So is Trump's patience really running out?
Is Trump's patience with whom really running out? Is it really running out with Putin? No, I don't think so. Is it running out with dealing with this conflict in general? Absolutely. I think that's in fact highly likely that Trump is increasingly frustrated with the fact that he has to deal with this at all, and he basically just wants to move on. So in his ideal world, this would end in some form of resolution, right? I mean, and Trump, I think, has invested a fair bit of political capital, in fact, in in this idea that he and he alone is capable of bringing peace, to end this war. So on the one hand, I think if he fails to do so, that will harm his credibility on the world stage. On the other hand, this is someone who doesn't feel any emotional attachment to the free world, right? So he doesn't particularly care how this war ends. And this is someone who I think significantly overestimated his ability to influence the Russian dictator, right? I mean, I think he genuinely believed that Putin was his friend. And we saw this as far back as 2018 when Donald Trump in Helsinki went to a press conference with Putin right there next to him. And he publicly said that Putin told him he did not meddle in the American election. And he, Donald Trump, believed Putin that Putin did not meddle, despite the fact that all 17 of American intelligence agencies agreed that Russia had meddled in our elections. So, this is someone who tends to give Putin the benefit of the doubt. So going back to your question, is Donald Trump's patience running out? Again, if you're asking if his patience is running out with Vladimir Putin, no, I do not think it is. I think Donald Trump continues, for whatever reason, to respect and admire the Russian dictator. But is his patience running out with this war in general? To that, I think the answer is yes. And I do think that it's possible, at least, that in the near future, Donald Trump could simply decide that America should walk away.
But what about sanctions? Yesterday, President Zelensky mentioned sanctions again, and it seems Trump is seriously considering them. Under what circumstances do you think he would actually impose sanctions on Russia?
Well, look, there already are sanctions on Russia, of course, as you know. And so the question is sort of to what extent is the executive branch, is the president, willing to enforce existing sanctions? So that's question number one. As for question number two, whether or not Donald Trump will be willing to impose additional sanctions on Russia, I think that's a difficult question to answer. This is someone who changes his mind kind of every single day. I mean, he could change his mind from in the evening after, he had a particularly good or bad dinner. So I think it's hard to guess exactly what it would take for Trump to increase the sanctions on Russia. I will say that I think it is more likely that Trump will do something with sanctions than it is that he would significantly increase his support for Ukraine. And the reason for that, I think, is twofold. Number one, I think Republicans tend to believe that Russia's fundamentally dangerous. Like, there is still that belief among Republicans. Of course, not all Republicans. The Republican Party is very split. There is a civil war, in fact, right now going on within the Republican Party between two factions. And let's say one faction is led by Tucker Carlson, who is pro-Russia, pro-Putin. This is someone who interviewed Dugin recently, right? So again, he is someone who is very sympathetic to the Russian message. And then on the other side of that is the somewhat at least more traditional Republican approach, which understands that Russia is a foe, an enemy, an adversary of America. And, this is represented by people like Congressman Don Bacon, Senator Lindsey Graham, et cetera. And actually a fair number of people in the Senate, at least, are supportive of this. So within this civil war, we see on the one hand that the Senate has now voted with 80 people in support of additional sanctions on Russia. But at the same time, we are seeing messaging from the administration about possible future business deals with Russia, minerals, and so on and so forth. And again, we're kind of seeing these trial balloons that the administration's putting out, I think, to both sides of the civil war, where on the one side, they're not saying no to new sanctions. They're allowing the Senate movement to proceed. But on the other hand, they're also talking about potential business deals with Russia. And so the question, I think, is ultimately, if the administration finally has to make a choice, what choice will they make? And my intuition, my gut tells me that they are going to try to avoid making a choice altogether. That they are basically going to try to maintain the status quo. They're not going to increase the sanctions on Russia, but nor will they get rid of them altogether. I think they're going to sort of maintain where things are. Now, again, that may change. Trump may get more frustrated. Maybe, someone might make a trade-related argument to Donald Trump. And this is where, that second piece, I think, of Trump's psychological makeup comes in, where he is someone who is clearly pro-tariff. He's someone who is deathly afraid of any kind of trade imbalance. And so, I think you mix that in with, perhaps some element of frustration with Putin for his unwillingness to offer any type of compromise or any type of concessions. And, I think there's a chance that we could use that avenue, that we could kind of approach that from that point of view to try to get the administration to take a firmer line. But when push comes to shove, if the goal is to try to get more sanctions on Russia, I think first and foremost, we have to turn to Europe. Europe needs to be the one leading the sanctions movement and limiting Russia's involvement with the global economy.
Uriel, yesterday we saw high-level negotiation, and just a day earlier, Ukraine launched a major strike on Russia aircraft. Trump waited until the talks were over before the White House made any public comment, and that comment was surprisingly restrained. So can we say that Trump, in a way, supports Ukraine, or at least didn't criticize or express disappointment?
I think Donald Trump respects strength, period. He's the ultimate person who believes that might makes right. If you recall, when Zelensky came to the White House, what is it that Trump said to him? You, Vladimir, you don't hold the cards. You don't have the cards. That was his argument. It's not about morality, right? It's not about who's right and who's wrong. I don't think Trump particularly cares about who's right and who's wrong. I think Trump cares about whether somebody looks strong or whether they look weak. So this operation over this weekend was an incredibly important one, not only because it achieved an incredible tactical victory for Ukraine by destroying a significant number of Russian strategic bombers, the impact of which, by the way, will be felt far beyond Ukrainian or Russian borders. I mean, these are the same planes that Russia uses to harass NATO countries. So it's actually NATO right now that offers a debt of gratitude to Ukraine for having destroyed a not insignificant percentage of Russia's strategic bomber fleet. But the second point, which I think is equally important, is that this made Ukraine look strong. It made Ukraine look like they do have an ability to to actually achieve victory, to achieve some semblance of victory. And I think Donald Trump respects that.
Mm-hmm. But when Russia tried to hit us, Trump said, Vladimir, stop, don't do this. But when we do not the same, but start hitting Russia aircraft, they just make it quiet, I don't know.
Well, okay, first of all, there's a big difference between Russia targeting Ukrainian civilians